Vladimir Komarov, Soyuz 1.
On April 22, 1967, 40-year-old Soviet cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov walked through the corridors of the Baikonur Cosmodrome knowing he was likely walking toward his death. He had been selected to pilot Soyuz 1, the first crewed flight of the Soviet Union's new spacecraft, designed to compete directly with the United States Apollo program during the height of the Cold War space race. But behind the public image of progress and power, there was a hidden reality. Komarov was fully aware of the spacecraft's dangerous flaws. His close friend and fellow cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, had urgently tried to convince mission planners to delay the launch. Engineers had already identified more than 200 technical problems during pre-flight testing. These included critical issues with the parachute system, unstable attitude control, and faulty heat shield bonding. Multiple reports had been submitted documenting these defects in detail. However, political pressure from the Soviet leadership overruled safety concerns. The mission had been scheduled to align with Lenin's birthday and the May Day celebrations, giving the Communist Party a symbolic propaganda victory they desperately wanted. Komarov understood the impossible position he was in. If he refused to fly, Yuri Gagarin would be sent in his place as the backup pilot. Knowing the risks, Komarov chose to go forward, unwilling to let his friend take that fate. At 3:35 a.m. Moscow time on April 23, 1967, Soyuz 1 lifted off into the darkness. Problems began almost immediately after reaching orbit. One of the spacecraft's 2 solar panels failed to deploy properly. This reduced power generation by half and prevented the spacecraft from correctly orienting itself toward the sun. Without proper alignment, the batteries began draining rapidly. At the same time, the ion sensors responsible for controlling the spacecraft's orientation became unreliable. As a result, Soyuz 1 began to tumble uncontrollably in space. Komarov fought desperately to regain control. Using manual systems, he attempted to stabilize the spacecraft, firing the attitude control thrusters and consuming valuable fuel reserves. Meanwhile, ground control monitored the situation with increasing concern. The planned rendezvous mission with Soyuz 2, which was supposed to launch the following day, carrying 3 additional cosmonauts, was immediately cancelled due to the growing danger. After completing 18 increasingly difficult orbits, Mission Control made a critical decision. Komarov was ordered to attempt an emergency re-entry back to Earth. On April 24th, as Soyuz 1 began its descent, Komarov manually oriented the spacecraft for re-entry. At first, the process appeared to proceed normally. The heat shield functioned as designed, protecting the descent module from the intense heat generated during atmospheric entry. But as the spacecraft slowed to subsonic speeds at an altitude of approximately 23,000 feet, the most critical failure occurred. The main parachute system did not deploy correctly. Due to a design flaw that engineers had previously identified, the parachute became stuck inside its container. Instead of opening fully, it tangled and failed to create enough drag to slow the spacecraft. Komarov immediately activated the backup parachute system. However, the situation worsened. The backup parachute became entangled with the partially deployed main chute and the drogue parachute, forming a twisted mass that rendered all systems ineffective. The spacecraft was now in an uncontrollable descent. Soviet listening stations recorded Komarov's final moments as Soyuz 1 fell toward Earth at a speed exceeding 250 miles per hour. Knowing he had less than a minute to live, he reportedly expressed anger toward those who had ignored the warnings and forced the mission forward. At 7:24 a.m., Soyuz 1 crashed near Orenburg with devastating force. The impact created a deep crater and ignited the remaining fuel, causing an intense fire. The descent module was completely flattened into a disk barely a meter high. Komarov's body was burned beyond recognition and fused with the wreckage. Recovery teams required hours to extract his remains. His death forced a complete reassessment of the Soviet space program. Crewed missions were suspended for 18 months while engineers redesigned the parachute system and addressed the many safety issues that had been ignored under political pressure. Komarov became the first human to die during a space mission, a tragic symbol of the cost of rushing technology in pursuit of national pride.
Soyuz 11.
On June 6, 1971, 3 Soviet cosmonauts, Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev, launched aboard Soyuz 11 from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. Their mission was historic. to dock with Salyut 1, the world's first operational space station, and prove that humans could live and work in space for extended periods. Dobrovolsky served as commander, Volkov as flight engineer, and Patsayev as research engineer. All three were experienced and highly trained, making them ideal for a mission of this importance. The launch proceeded without any issues. Approximately 24 hours later, Soyuz 11 successfully docked with Salyut 1, marking the first time humans had ever occupied a space station. For the next 22 days, the mission appeared to be a complete success. The crew conducted a wide range of scientific experiments, including astronomical observations, biological research, materials processing, and Earth photography. They adapted to long-term weightlessness and even exceeded their planned objectives, requesting additional tasks to fill their remaining time. Communication with ground control remained steady, professional, and optimistic. There were no signs of any technical problems or concerns aboard the station. On June 29, after completing their mission, the cosmonauts prepared to return to Earth. They sealed the hatches between Salyut 1 and the Soyuz 11 spacecraft and initiated the undocking sequence at 21:28 Moscow time. The spacecraft separated cleanly from the station. About 40 minutes later, the crew fired the service module engine for the deorbit burn, beginning their descent toward a landing site in Kazakhstan. Everything appeared normal. As planned, the service module and orbital module separated from the descent module, leaving the three men inside the small spherical capsule designed to carry them safely through re-entry. The spacecraft entered the upper atmosphere, and once again, all systems seemed to function correctly. The heat shield protected the capsule from the intense heat generated by atmospheric friction. At the appropriate altitude, the drogue parachute deployed successfully, followed by the main parachute. Both systems worked as intended, slowing the spacecraft to a safe descent speed. Moments before landing, the soft landing rockets fired automatically, cushioning the impact as the capsule touched down gently on the Kazakh steppe at 2:17 a.m. on June 30. Recovery teams were already on their way. Helicopters circled overhead as ground crews rushed toward the capsule, expecting to greet three heroes who had just completed a groundbreaking mission. But when they opened the hatch, something was terribly wrong. Inside, all three cosmonauts were still strapped into their seats, motionless. Their faces had turned blue. There were no visible injuries, no signs of fire or impact damage. They were dead. A medical examination revealed the shocking cause. The crew had suffocated due to rapid decompression. During the descent, a pressure equalization valve had opened prematurely, allowing the cabin's atmosphere to escape into space. This valve was designed to open only after landing to equalize pressure with the outside environment. Instead, it malfunctioned at an altitude of approximately 550,000 feet, far above the Kármán line, where space effectively begins. The cabin depressurized in just 112 seconds. The crew likely lost consciousness within 15 to 20 seconds due to hypoxia, with death following within about a minute. They had no chance to respond. Further investigation revealed the cause of the malfunction. During the separation of the spacecraft modules, explosive bolts were used to detach components. It is believed that a shock wave or debris from this process damaged the valve, causing it to open unintentionally. Tragically, the crew was not wearing pressure suits. At the time, Soviet spacecraft design did not allow enough space for three cosmonauts to wear full protective suits during flight. This decision proved fatal. The Soyuz 11 disaster remains the only incident in history where humans have died due to exposure to the vacuum of space. In response, the Soviet space program implemented major design changes. Spacecraft were modified to accommodate fewer crew members so that pressure suits could be worn during launch and re-entry. Pressure valves were also reinforced to prevent similar failures. These safety measures became standard practice, not only in Soviet missions but across human spaceflight. The success of the mission had demonstrated humanity's ability to live in space. But its ending served as a reminder that even a perfect mission can turn into tragedy in seconds. Challenger disaster, STS-51L. On the morning of January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger stood on Launch Pad 39B at the Kennedy Space Center, prepared for its 10th mission, designated STS-51L. On board were 7 crew members: Commander Francis Dick Scobie, pilot Michael Smith, mission specialists Judith Resnick, Ellison Onizuka, and Ronald McNair, payload specialist Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe, a high school teacher selected for NASA's Teacher in Space program. The mission had already been delayed multiple times due to weather and technical concerns. This created growing pressure from both NASA leadership and the public to proceed with the launch. The night before liftoff, engineers from Morton Thiokol, the company responsible for the shuttle's solid rocket boosters, raised a serious concern. Temperatures were expected to drop to around 18 degrees Fahrenheit, far below the conditions in which the rocket booster O-ring seals had been tested. Senior engineers Roger Boisley and Alan McDonald warned that the extreme cold could cause the rubber O-rings to become stiff and fail to seal properly. If that happened, hot gases could escape from the rocket boosters, potentially leading to catastrophic failure. A tense teleconference took place that night between NASA officials and Thiokol engineers. Despite the warnings, NASA managers argued there was insufficient proof that cold temperatures would cause failure. Under intense pressure to avoid another delay, Thiokol management ultimately overruled their own engineers and approved the launch. At 11:38 a.m. EST, Challenger lifted off. For the first minute, everything appeared normal. The shuttle accelerated through the atmosphere, powered by its main engines and solid rocket boosters. Then, at 59 seconds after liftoff, cameras captured a small flame near the lower joint of the right booster. The O-ring had failed. Superheated gas reaching temperatures of approximately 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit began escaping and acting like a blowtorch against the external fuel tank. The flame quickly intensified, burning through structural supports and weakening the connection between the booster and the tank. At 72 seconds into the flight, traveling at Mach 1.92 and an altitude of 48,000 feet, the external fuel tank ruptured. A massive explosion followed. However, the explosion itself did not instantly kill the crew. The crew cabin, designed to withstand extreme forces, separated from the shuttle and continued upward briefly before beginning a long fall toward the Atlantic Ocean. Emergency oxygen systems activated automatically, and evidence suggests that at least some crew members were conscious during the descent. Pilot Michael Smith was heard saying, "Uh-oh," indicating awareness of the unfolding disaster. The crew cabin fell for 2 minutes and 45 seconds, reaching speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour before impacting the ocean approximately 18 miles offshore. The impact was unsurvivable. All 7 crew members lost their lives. The Challenger disaster led to a 32-month suspension of the shuttle program. A presidential investigation identified the O-ring failure and management decisions as key causes. The solid rocket boosters were redesigned with improved seals and heating systems to prevent similar issues in cold weather.
Columbia disaster, STS-107.
17 years later, on January 16, 2003, another tragedy unfolded during the launch of Space Shuttle Columbia on mission STS-107. The crew included 7 astronauts: Commander Rick Husband, pilot William McCool, mission specialists Kalpana Chawla, David Brown, Laurel Clark, Michael Anderson, and payload specialist Ilan Ramon. The mission focused on scientific research with over 80 experiments conducted in orbit. During launch, 81.7 seconds after liftoff, a large piece of foam insulation broke away from the external fuel tank and struck the leading edge of Columbia's left wing. The foam weighed approximately 1.67 pounds and measured about 21 by 27 inches, significantly larger than typical debris. Engineers reviewed footage of the strike but concluded that similar incidents had occurred on previous missions without causing major damage. A debris assessment team requested high-resolution imaging of the wing using military satellites or ground-based telescopes to evaluate possible damage. However, NASA management denied the request, stating that even if damage existed, no repair options were available in orbit. This decision proved fatal. The foam strike had created a hole between 6 to 10 inches wide in the wing's reinforced carbon-carbon panels, which were critical for protecting the shuttle during re-entry. For the next 16 days, the crew remained completely unaware of the damage. They continued their mission successfully, conducting experiments and communicating normally with ground control. On February 1, 2003, Columbia began its re-entry over the Pacific Ocean. As the shuttle descended through the atmosphere at speeds exceeding 17,000 miles per hour, superheated plasma entered the damaged section of the left wing. Temperatures inside the wing rapidly exceeded 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, melting internal structures and compromising the shuttle's integrity. Sensors began reporting abnormal readings, but the severity of the problem was not immediately understood. At 8:59 a.m. EST, while flying over Texas at an altitude of approximately 207,000 feet, the left wing failed completely. The shuttle became uncontrollable and broke apart under extreme aerodynamic forces. Debris scattered across Texas and Louisiana. All 7 crew members were killed. The Columbia disaster led to major changes in NASA procedures, including mandatory inspection of thermal protection systems and the development of in-orbit repair capabilities.
X-15 Flight 36597.
On November 15, 1967, U.S. Air Force Major Michael J. Adams prepared for what would be his 7th flight in the experimental X-15 rocket plane program. At 37 years old, Adams was an experienced and highly skilled test pilot, selected for the program due to his exceptional performance in high-speed and high-altitude aircraft. He was also being considered for NASA's Astronaut Corps. The X-15 program was designed to explore the boundary between atmospheric flight and spaceflight. These rocket-powered aircraft could reach altitudes above 50 miles, where traditional aerodynamic controls became ineffective and reaction control systems were required. Adams's mission, designated Flight 3659, had a clear objective. He was to reach an altitude of approximately 250,000 feet while conducting an ultraviolet stellar photography experiment and evaluating how the aircraft's control systems performed in near-vacuum conditions. At 10:30 a.m., the X-15 was carried aloft under the wing of a modified B-52 bomber over the Mojave Desert. At an altitude of 45,000 feet, Adams was released. Immediately after separation, he ignited the XLR-99 rocket engine, producing around 57,000 pounds of thrust. The aircraft accelerated rapidly, eventually exceeding 3,800 miles per hour as it climbed steeply toward space. During the ascent, Adams reported that all systems were functioning normally. The aircraft reached its peak altitude of approximately 266,000 feet, officially entering space. This made Adams the first person to die during a spaceflight, though that distinction would only be fully recognized later. However, during this high-altitude phase, a critical problem developed. The X-15 began to experience an unintended yaw motion, a sideways rotation that disrupted its stability. Due to the extremely thin atmosphere at that altitude, Adams had very little aerodynamic feedback, making it difficult to detect and correct the issue immediately.
The aircraft's reaction control system, which was supposed to maintain orientation in space, was not functioning properly. As Adams began his descent back into the atmosphere, the problem worsened. The yaw motion increased, eventually causing the aircraft to enter a spin. Adams attempted to regain control using conventional aerodynamic controls, but at such high altitude and speed, these controls had very limited effectiveness. Ground controllers at Edwards Air Force Base tracked the aircraft's erratic path and attempted to guide him, but communication was inconsistent due to the plasma buildup around the hypersonic vehicle. As the X-15 descended through 200,000 feet, it entered denser layers of the atmosphere. Under normal conditions, this would have allowed Adams to regain control using aerodynamic surfaces, but the situation had already escalated beyond recovery. The aircraft's angle of attack had become extreme, effectively causing it to move sideways through the air at speeds exceeding 3,000 miles per hour. This created enormous aerodynamic forces acting on the structure. At approximately 65,000 feet, traveling at around Mach 3.5, the stress on the aircraft became catastrophic. The X-15 began to break apart under the intense aerodynamic loads. At the same time, Adams was subjected to forces exceeding 15 Gs, far beyond what the human body can tolerate for sustained periods. It is believed he lost consciousness before the final breakup of the aircraft. The main wreckage impacted the ground near Johannesburg, California, creating a deep crater. Adams's body was later found still strapped into his ejection seat, which had not been activated. The investigation determined that the aircraft's adaptive flight control system had malfunctioned during the high-altitude phase, initiating the yaw motion that ultimately led to loss of control. The tragedy led to improvements in pilot training for high-altitude and spaceflight conditions, as well as enhancements in backup control systems for experimental aircraft. Major Michael J. Adams was posthumously awarded astronaut wings, becoming the first person to earn that distinction after losing his life during a spaceflight.